Paris Climate Accord. President Trump is said to be considering withdrawing the United States from the Paris Climate Agreement, a landmark accord reached in 2015 between 195 countries that seeks to avoid some of the worst effects of climate change by curbing global greenhouse gas emissions. The White House says it has not yet reached a final decision on Paris, and hundreds of corporations and world leaders are lobbying the United States to stay in the pact. Within the administration, some senior officials, including Secretary of State Rex W. Tillerson, have warned the president that the diplomatic repercussions from leaving could be severe. An American withdrawal would not scuttle the Paris Accord, but it could seriously weaken global efforts to avoid drastic climate change. Here's a primer on how the Paris Agreement works, and what could happen if the United States leaves. Under the Paris Agreement, every country submitted an individual plan to tackle its greenhouse gas emissions and then agreed to meet regularly to review their progress and prod one another to ratchet up their efforts as the years went by. Unlike its predecessor treaty, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris deal was intended to be non-binding, so that countries could tailor their climate plans to their domestic situations and alter them as circumstances changed. There are no penalties for falling short of declared targets. The hope was that, through peer pressure and diplomacy, these policies would be strengthened over time. Under the deal, the Obama administration pledged to cut domestic greenhouse gas emissions 26 to 28% below 2005 levels by 2025, as well as to commit up to $3 billion in aid for poorer countries by 2020. The United States has delivered $1 billion to date. China vowed that its emissions would peak around 2030 and that it would get about 20% of its electricity from carbon-free sources by then. India would continue to reduce its carbon intensity, or CO2 output per unit of economic activity, in line with historical levels. While the current pledges would not prevent global temperatures from rising more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, the threshold deemed unacceptably risky, there is some evidence that the Paris deal's soft diplomacy is nudging countries toward greater action. A recent study from the Grantham Research Institute found that the mere existence of the accord had prodded dozens of countries to enact new clean energy laws. How would the United States withdraw from Paris? Because the deal is non-binding, there are no penalties if the United States pulls out. The Trump administration can invoke the accord's formal withdrawal mechanism, which takes 4 years, though American officials could stop participating in any future climate talks immediately. A future administration could, if it chose, rejoin. More radically, the Trump administration could withdraw from the underlying United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, signaling a withdrawal from all United Nations-sponsored climate discussions. It is not yet clear which option the Trump administration would choose, if it decides to leave. If the United States does leave, it will join Syria and Nicaragua as the only 2 countries not participating in the accord. The United States could also face serious diplomatic repercussions for leaving. Europe, China and other countries may threaten to withhold cooperation on issues the Trump administration cares about. In a more extreme case, other countries could decide to impose carbon tariffs on the United States. What would withdrawal mean for American climate efforts? Whether or not the United States leaves Paris, the Trump administration will keep trying to dismantle the Obama administration's domestic climate policies, including the Clean Power Plan to curtail emissions from power plants, and various regulations on methane leaks from oil and gas operations. Those rollbacks are still far from assured, however, and environmentalists plan to challenge them in court. Pulling out of Paris would not mean the end of all domestic efforts to reduce emissions. States like California and New York plan to keep pursuing their own programs to clean up power plants and vehicles. And the private sector is already shifting toward cleaner energy. Cheap natural gas and renewables will continue to drive the retirement of coal plants. But the United States would be doing far less about global warming than it otherwise might have done. A recent analysis by the Rhodium Group estimated that, under Mr. Trump's policies, United States emissions will now most likely fall 15 to 19% below 2005 levels by 2025, rather than the 26 to 28% that the Obama administration pledged.